and public safety threats. Again, crisis at the border, but it goes beyond that and it implicates other executive powers as well.
Yeah.
President Trump, if cartels are now going to be seen as foreign terror organizations, would you think about ordering U.S. Special Forces into Mexico to take them out?
Could happen. Stranger things have happened.
Mr. President,
And that was actually
sure that Maduro will accept Venezuelans.
Say it.
How will you make sure that Maduro will accept Venezuelans?
Well, we're going to see in Venezuela. We're looking at.
Well, there's Donald J. Trump signing all of his executive orders on day one of his administration with his big fat Sharpie, saying really incisive presidential things like, well, we'll see. Stranger things have happened. In this case, he is talking about one of the many executive orders he signed, I think about 5, having to do with the southern border, including one proclaiming a national emergency at the southern border and ordering DOD to help. I am Fred Wellman, host of On Democracy. Excuse me, wrong show. I am Fred Wellman here with On the Line with VoteVets. JJ is going to pay for that one later. It is great to be with you live here at lunchtime. We really wanted to kind of talk to you guys about what's happening with these border security executive orders and the implications that are hidden inside of those orders. As with many of the things that have come out in these first opening days of the Trump administration, while the headline says one thing, there's things buried. A good example is the one saying they're going to not do the Green New Deal stuff anymore, actually ended funding for projects that had been approved under the Infrastructure Act. So this is not just yet another one of those cases. And we're going to talk about that. We've got an incredible guest. One of our good friends, Senator Heidi Heitkamp, is going to join us. But let's talk about where we're at as far as this goes. As I mentioned, the proclamation, he said, secure their border, authorizes the Secretary of Defense to move money within the department to fund construction of the border wall once again. If you remember, he did this during the first term. It further authorizes the Secretary of Defense to call up reservists and National Guardsmen to assist the Department of Homeland Security in its border activities. Many are calling this first emergency order a declaration. It's sort of a very dubious one of this, considering that actually is there really an emergency at the border compared to what we've always had? MSNBC had this little bit of clip to talk about it with their reporter standing in the same spot he stands at every single time he's at the border. Let's see what Rachel Maddow had to say.
A state of emergency is officially now in effect on the border. Does it feel like an emergency where you are standing?
Feels no different than 20 minutes ago or 30 minutes ago or an hour ago when we got here early this morning, Rachel. The one practical change that we do know that has gone into effect here is that CBP One app that was put into place by the Biden administration, part of their stated effort to have a more fair, safe, humane, orderly process at the border, has been discontinued by the Trump administration and President Trump. I have to say, I've reported from this spot over the course of 4 different presidential administrations for.
He goes on to say he's been at that spot for like 10 years and hasn't changed. The 1976 National Emergency Act gives the president broad discretion to declare a national emergency, and that declaration serves as a trigger to unlock powers contained in an unbelievable 150 different provisions of law that are buried in there, including some that carry alarming potential for abuse. For instance, there are provisions allowing the president to take over or shut down communications facilities and to freeze Americans' assets without judicial process. I had a guest on my show not long ago who pointed out that when the law was written originally, radio went radio stations, but believe it or not, by the modern definition, your Bluetooth is radio. And it has not been updated since that original right. So there's some really, really scary stuff just in the National Emergencies Act. They could freeze Americans' assets without judicial process. It's hard not to see how a president using these powers can erode both individual liberties and democracy itself. So where's DOD in all of this? Acting Secretary of Defense Robert Salas said he directed the Defense Department to begin augmenting its forces at the southwest border with 1,500 ground personnel, as well as helicopters and associated crews, as well as intelligence analysts to support increased detection and monitoring. As you can see, it's being reported. That was 500 Marines who were supposed to be standing by for the California fires at Camp Pendleton. Instead, those 500 Marines have now been deployed to the border in an emergency act. There's talk within the Pentagon of another 1,500 Marines or 2,000, which is a pretty big contingent of Marines, considering how small the force is and with their worldwide deployment and contingencies they have to follow up. The Pentagon's being a little bit, they're kind of hot. There was rumors of a 10,000 troop deployment. That's a very large number. That's a half a division if you think about that number. But we can't get confirmation of any of that. In the meantime, Salas also confirmed that U.S. Transportation Command has been instructed to prepare to use military aircraft. We don't know to think about that since that story was written. We've already this morning gotten word that 2 C-17 aircraft of Transportation Command have flown to Guatemala with 80 immigrants on each of them. So they're already using C-130s being sent from San Diego and El Paso to support the flights and flying down to our South American allies. This is on, let's see, they've already, I got just reading breaking news right now. They're talking about sending troops in the 82nd Airborne Division. If you guys understand why guys like me might find that unhappy about that, is keep in mind the 82nd Airborne Division is the Army's contingency force, the deployment contingency force. That's who we send first, all the way back to as long as we can remember. During Desert Shield, you may remember when we first announced our support for our Saudi allies, it was the 82nd Airborne that jumped on their planes and flew straight to Saudi Arabia, followed by everybody else. That is the mode they operate in, and now those same troops are being sent to the southern border, it looks like, to back up a national emergency. There's already National Guardsmen. If you remember, our friend Governor Abbott has had a Operation Lone Star going on, headed by the Texas National Guard and using red state National Guard partners. There's 4,500 National Guardsmen currently assigned to the mission, according to Texas Military Department. Buried in that executive order is for, now this is where it gets interesting, and we can bring this up. Buried in the executive order for increased U.S. troops is a line that states that after 90 days, the Secretaries of Homeland Security and State will submit a report to Trump on whether or not the program will be in the interests of the United States, including things like using the Insurrection Act, of 1807. Now, the Insurrection Act authorizes the president to deploy military forces inside the United States to suppress rebellion or domestic violence or enforce law in certain situations. I won't go too deep into that, but it's an old law. Actually, it's actually, they call it the Insurrection Act of 1807, but it's actually an amalgamation of different statutes Congress enacted between 1792 and 1871. It is a lot, and there is a lot in there. And the Insurrection Act is a very serious escalation. It hasn't been used since, I want to say 1992 during the riots following the Rodney King situation in Los Angeles, and that was in the hands of President George Bush. To say it's opening a virtual Pandora's box of serious issues is an understatement. This very issue was the focus of a documentary called War Game, produced by our partners at the Vet Voice Foundation, starring a number of people you might recognize. I played a bad guy. It was kind of a good time. One of the stars playing the senior advisor to the president was Senator Heidi Heitkamp. She has a, well, let's watch Senator Heitkamp.
The Insurrection Act is a trap.
We need to have a further conversation.
It's a defining moment.
This guy got elected being who he is. And so don't write this in Washington speak. He write it in his speak.
Right.
Because that's what the people expect. They expect somebody who's going to tell them the truth in plain, simple language, not blah, blah, blah. Keep it in his, Mr.
I think you're
President's
absolutely right, Madam Advisor. What do you want me to call you?
You can call me Heidi. I think what brought us all together is a need to be better prepared. And the exercise is Introduction to Coup Prevention 101.
I get tense watching the clips, Heidi. Welcome to the show, Senator Heidi Heitkamp. For those who don't know, she's former Democratic senator from the great state of North Dakota, co-founder and chair of the One Country Project. She was the first woman elected to the Senate in North Dakota. And of course, as you can see, senior advisor to the president in the War Game documentary. Heidi, thanks for joining us. Just call me Heidi.
Thanks for having me. And, it's interesting because, Fred, I was recently asked, about all these executive orders. And I said, the ones that you have to really pay attention to are these executive orders that foretell, I think, more serious action later on. And,
right.
This is a president. In fact, I hope people go out and see War Game. You can catch it on most streaming platforms right now.
Worth the time.
The whole exercise was, okay, at what point should a president use the most serious power that a president has, which is the invocation of the Insurrection Act, which then basically allows suspension of civil liberties. It allows a whole lot of things, but more equally serious is it allows a president to basically take our armed services in the active pursuit of domestic policy. And so there's something called the Posse Comitatus Act that's been around for a long time. It's been expanded. It says basically that America's armed services are there to protect us from enemies, that aren't within our border. And, that prohibits the use of troops to do things within the boundaries of this country, absent the invocation of this authority. If in fact the president invokes the Insurrection Act, you literally could have at his command, because he's commander in chief, American military enforcing basically being used to round up and deport people within the country. And so the question is, do you want American soldiers to be the ones coming into homes or into businesses and basically extracting people that they believe may not always be true? We saw that today in New Jersey. They retained and basically rounded up people who were in fact American citizens, and horribly an American veteran who was detained. They wouldn't believe him when he showed him his veteran service cards. So this is very, very serious, and it goes back to this idea. I mean, I just want to say this. You say, well, this power has always been around, but the norms of how people approach the job of president really create, I think, some guardrails that it's not done, and it should only be done in the rarest of circumstances when people's lives are being threatened in ways that, or our democracy is being threatened in ways that are imminent. And now you have somebody who has definitely signaled that they will use it because they unilaterally have decided this is a national emergency.
You know what's funny? I'm seeing the comments for this. People are posting their comments online. We appreciate you. By the way, please post comments. If you have questions, JJ will collect those. But I've several people have asked the one key question, ma'am. How is this legal? But you and I know it's perfectly legal, isn't it? That's the scary
part. It
part.
Can be. He has not yet invoked the Insurrection Act. No. And let's take a step back and realize that Biden sent troops to the border.
Yes.
So did Obama. This is not new. We have, in fact, I rode on a helicopter with American Marines in Guatemala when I was in office. So let's not pretend that we aren't there in an advisory role to the Guatemalan government. They were there to assist in terms of helping the government in Guatemala control their own borders. And so so far, it's depending upon how those troops are used. If they're not used in law enforcement capacity, they're used in logistics, they're used in ways that don't directly usurp a local law enforcement responsibility or a customs and border protection responsibility, that's okay. And Democrats have done it too. It's just that when you read the executive order and right away you say, oh, they really are taking those first initial steps to determine whether they should invoke the Insurrection Act. And Americans need to understand what that means and what that means in terms of abrogating the public policy surrounding posse comitatus laws.
And it removes much of Congress's power as well. The checks and balances, a lot of those checks and balances that were even the courts get lost when the Insurrection Act is invoked, isn't it?
Well, and if you watch War Game, it was interesting because so many of the military, retired military who participated in that exercise just said, you're asking Americans to hold guns against Americans. And that is so serious and not why people signed up to serve in the military. And
we're not trained for it and not trained for it, by the way.
Yeah. Yeah. And so we'll see, I think, how this escalates. But I will tell everyone of all the things you can say, okay, eliminating DEI, we've seen the whole rash of executive orders. The one that I think is the most serious and the public needs to understand is in fact the emergency order, which then talks about the Insurrection Act.
Yeah, and that's I did have a show a while ago where we talked about that, talk about what's hidden in there, and it is shocking what's in the National Emergencies Act. Like I believe our guest told me that, as we mentioned in the preview, that 150 laws have provisions buried in them that have to do the National Emergencies Act. And you're right. I mean, the last time it has been used for many. I think there's some 20 current national emergencies, which is sad, but it does unlock powers for a president. But like you mentioned earlier, in the hands of someone like a George Bush or a Barack Obama, it's one thing. But in the hands of someone like Donald J. Trump, who is a different animal completely, isn't it?
Well, and you have to remember that General Flynn on January 6th, prior to January 6th, was begging the president to invoke the Insurrection Act to enforce, to basically use the military to prevent the peaceful transfer of power. I mean, that was on the table, and cooler heads prevailed. And I think, at some point it would be good to have Mark Esper on, who was Secretary of Defense, who really pushed back against what was an overreach. And so there were people in the room who basically said, that is not a good idea. Let's not do that. And now I don't see anyone who is going to say no to this president. There is no one who is putting guardrails on where he wants to take the country. And he has a self-proclaimed mandate as he sees it, and he's going to do whatever he wants. Now, understand this. I've seen some polling, particularly as it relates to the pardons that were issued for the January 6th insurrectionists, that tell you that the public may not be as tolerant as the minions and the sycophants that are in the administration and in Congress.
Yeah. And there's still power there, right? Congress, I mean, how far do you think Congress will allow this to slide? Do you think there's a chance? I mean, what's the fight they could put up?
Well, do you trust Congress to do anything?
Oh, no, not currently. Let's not be silly about that. No, I mean, I'm a dreamer. I admit it. I still have some weird, for being an old soldier, I had this odd optimism streak. I can't get rid of it. I've tried, but
Yeah, let me help you calibrate. Let me help you calibrate. I think so far we have somebody who is clearly unfit to be Secretary of Defense. Clearly. He's been named Secretary of Defense because he will do whatever the Commander-in-Chief, aka the President, asked him to do. And one thing that Trump has figured out is Bill Barr wouldn't carry out unconstitutional orders. Mike Esper wouldn't carry out unconstitutional orders. Let's find people who will. And I think, this idea that there was going to be a so-called adults in the room that would argue this, you aren't seeing it. And even if I read the tea leaves right, the Vice President, J.D. Vance, cautioned the president about pardoning violent January 6th offenders, and the president ignored that. So even someone as close as the vice president, as handpicked vice president, wasn't able to calibrate or advise the president not to do things that were going to hurt our democracy.
And we know Pete Hegseth won't. I mean, we've seen his record of he has no experience managing organization larger than 30 people, a massive organization. I do find it troubling myself. I don't know if you saw that there was a statement actually put out by the Pentagon's official spokesman that there would not be any resistance this time, essentially, that basically we stand fully behind the president to do what the orders were given. I mean, it's a little chilling. And then they shut down all their social media channels, paused all social media announcements, except for announcements relating to the border for an unspecified amount of time. It's as a former spokesman for the military, I found it very chilling. I mean, I imagine you as a senator who did oversight of our government, does that give you kind of chill as well?
Yeah, I mean, in the end, the only check on this president will be the next election, probably in the midterms. The only check on the president will be, his own conscience, and so you can decide whether that is appropriate checks and balances. But if you're looking for Congress or for the Senate, certainly not the House. I mean, Mike Johnson owes his whole political career to this president. He was able to withstand, a pushback against him becoming the speaker again. He clearly, I don't know that he's drank the Kool-Aid, but he clearly knows which side his bread is buttered on. And how's that for a bunch of metaphors? Anyway.
That was awesome. You must have been in politics.
I know John Thune, and I think he's very principled and he understands, but I think he's also, let's pick and choose our fights. And right now, let's admit on your show that nothing that he's done as it relates to the use of the military is an exaggeration of what's been done. Or it's just, what is it setting up other than the order of a national emergency, which is setting up the potential of invoking the Insurrection Act. And, I think that what potentially could happen is, as they are rounding up people for deportation. And, I've seen, relatives of people who are in this country without documentation say, oh, it won't happen to, Juan or Pedro because guess what? They've never committed a crime. Well, they're in this country illegally. They have committed a crime. And so this complacency that some people may feel like he's not going to do that, I think that's misplaced.
I agree. And circling back to what we talked about the troops, my perspective, I'm a retired Army officer. I've worked with troops of all types. I had the Pathfinder platoon, the 101st Airborne. The idea of soldiers, 18-year-old soldiers with no law enforcement training whatsoever to speak of, being the ones that will conduct raids in support of constitutional sheriffs or the DHS is chilling, because unfortunately that's not what we do. I mean, soldiers sent in to break things. Especially the soldiers they would use in this operation. And don't think the military police isn't that big. It's not going to be, there isn't thousands and thousands of military policemen. There's a couple of thousand. And so it'll be every day, John, Joe, even women who are just infantry or otherwise, be the ones being tasked to kick down doors. They don't know the difference. They don't know the difference between documentation and non-documentation. They'll just scoop people up and let somebody else sort them out. It's a very chilling development for those of us who have served, I think.
Well, the other thing, as it relates to the Insurrection Act, allows the president to nationalize the National Guard.
Right.
So all of a sudden, the National Guard, which their commander in chief is the governor of their state. It's not the president. There is a National Guard Bureau that sets standards and participates, and we use our National Guard way different than we did during the Vietnam era. These are soldiers. These are people who have been deployed. These are people who are, risking their life across the world every day in defense of our country. But if you're a National Guardsman in California and the Insurrection Act is invoked, you are now under the command of the president if the president so deems so.
And it's not like other things aren't going on. We have massive wildfires in California. They're still recovering from Hurricane Helene. At the same time, Trump's out here talking about getting rid of FEMA and letting the states handle it. Well, who do you think the state's going to rely on if the states handle it? National Guard. It's like, I have a son who's a National Guard, my son-in-law, and I'm sure, that meme that they're calculating, and he's like, the math don't math. At some point, there's only so many, and then things get ugly fast if we've got troops at the border, standing around, posting on social media how they're standing around bored of their skulls when a hurricane takes out a lot of people that need help. I mean, it is a very dangerous move they're making, just in general, isn't it?
Well, I mean, let's just kind of, if the states could handle it, they don't need to ask the president for a national disaster declaration. Okay. So how does FEMA end up on the ground? At the request of a governor.
Right. So,
this idea, let the states handle it. How does that work when it's the states who are asking for the assistance? And you can say, well, those federal resources are pretty significant, and they surely are, having the ability to bring some, but again, how do we share that overall risk of these national disasters? There's so many people who would say, well, California, just take care of yourself. You didn't do what you needed to do. Well, North Carolina, take care of yourself, or farmer, take care of yourself. At what point does that argument then, in terms of sharing risk across the broader American population, once you erode that idea that this is a local problem, you then take away, I think, an argument for incentivizing all of us in sharing that cost and risk. And we just did what, I forget how many billions of dollars for Hurricane Helene. So whatever that means, kind of long term.
I want to circle back to the border. And we've got a chart. I think JJ could bring it up. I mean, the irony of them calling a national emergency right now is that border crossings are one of their all-time lows. That's a current chart as of this week. I mean, it's actually somewhat low. You mentioned you've been to Guatemala. We just heard now that 2 flights are taking people to Guatemala. Our allies down south haven't all said they're really up to this. I mean, the president of Mexico has been very direct that she's not interested in participating in this ludicrous stuff. And the idea of sending U.S. troops, as we mentioned at the top of the show, into Mexico would be met with force. This has international implications.
Can I just interrupt? Because we need to, having cartels, which I think they're terrorist organizations, but that's also part of this overall kind of strategy and plan.
Yeah.
So when you look at those numbers and you realize the frustration the American public had, and obviously the big numbers are during the Biden administration, that big spike up. When you look at the frustration and how immigration, and then you say, but look, like they were on the way, they needed to react a lot earlier than what they did, right? And so my point would be, the public and the voting public responded to these big spikes. The president President Biden, along with his advisors, realized this was a problem, implemented some strategies that drove those numbers down. But it was too little too late to turn the tide on public opinion.
Yeah, and we have to be honest, right? I mean, I'm sure you've seen it, ma'am. There are polls showing that the U.S. population at this point does support border action of some kind. That there isn't the majority of Americans, and that's bipartisan, by the way, does support some sort of action at the border. But I think what we're talking about here, especially, and then we learned our lesson in War Game, is it's the fine print, right? It's always the fine print, isn't it? I mean, you were a senator, it's always the fine print, isn't it?
Well, and so what does that mean? They want something done at the border. What does that look like? Do they want to have in their mind, are they separating the people who are living, working, law-abiding, except for how they got into the country? Are they separating those people from what's happening in terms of border security, stopping people from coming across the border? And now we've got 3 things that are happening simultaneously. A border strategy that is consistent, I think, with what Biden did. Maybe we'll get tighter and tighter. Obviously, the asylum hearings have been cut off. And we all saw those pictures of people crying who had been waiting, who all of a sudden the app went down. Now they don't have an asylum hearing. So functionally shutting down asylum claims. I will tell you what will happen as a result of that. You're going to see more and more crossings, not at the port of entry where it can be managed, but all along the southern border, as people try and find other ways, as the cartels basically realize now we've got a money-making business in terms of shipping people and shepherding across the border. We're going to charge them a lot of money. So that border security isn't the same as interior enforcement, which is what ICE does. And so you say, okay, but are they separate in the president's mind? I don't think they are. And you add to that the birthright citizenship challenges. That executive order, which has basically, I think at this point, received a temporary stay by the district court judge, saying they're, basically said to the DOJ lawyer, I don't know how you can stand in front of me as a lawyer with a straight face and
He didn't make it through his first sentence. The judge
he just interrupted and said,
he just cut right off.
Yeah, shut up. Yeah, you know better. But these are all parts of the overall strategy. And so the American public needs to, I think, understand that where we all want a secure border. I was endorsed by Border Patrol when I ran for re-election. I spent a lot of time talking about what does that look like? Not necessarily building a wall, but how can we do surveillance better at the border? I've spent a lot of time, especially in Arizona and Western Texas and New Mexico on the border. And so I've spent a lot of time on the border. I've seen a lot of things that should never happen on that border. And so I'm sympathetic to the American public saying you cannot have an open border. You've got to figure it out. But how about the fruit pickers or the apple pickers or the orange pickers who are basically delivering our fruits and vegetables? 40% I think at a fair estimate, who aren't documented. Where are they? Where are they? What's going to happen to their economy if you deport 15 million people? What's going to happen to the construction trades? And so I think that the American public is clearly overwhelmingly in support of border security, of securing our border. Less sure about whether we should deport every person here who's undocumented. Less sure about that, especially, dreamers who came when they were kids. And then you go to birthright citizenship. And so there's a whole spectrum of where he sees it all as one issue. I think the American public sees it in those three tranches.
Yep, I think that sums it up nicely. I think and what does it mean? Again, going back to what you're saying, it's what else is in the plan? Like what else they talk about? The birthright situation is shocking and has implications beyond the Constitution and beyond national security in a million ways, shocking ways. Yeah. I think it was Kamala's illegal in that region.
Yeah, well, Fred, think about this. So how many people are in this country because of birthright citizenship who have ancestors? I'm pretty sure my ancestors did not migrate to this country legally. In fact, we always tell the story, but they didn't come in through the Mexican border, but I think they may have come in through Canada, right? Yeah. In the early 1900s, late 1800s. And so does that mean I'm not a citizen because my dad wasn't a citizen and my mom wasn't a citizen because their grandparents weren't citizens because they weren't in this country illegally, even though they were born here?
Yep.
That their ancestors were. It is a
now they know.
I mean, the kind of thread that you can pull that would take apart people's relationships with this country is just really quite remarkable and clearly not well thought out.
So as you go into this, I know you have to go. You got CNN hits, everything else. What are you looking for? I mean, and for our viewers and us who are activists and advocates, as this progresses, as you said something very key, I want to pull that thread, is so far they really haven't done anything that hasn't been done before by others. They're doing it very quickly. They want to show like the shock and awe that they joked about or talked about. So there have been some very quick movements. I mean, deploying active duty Marines quickly to the border to include with weapons is significant. But to this point, we haven't really seen something extraordinarily new. What should
except for the emergency order?
Right, the emergency order. What else? What should we be looking for as the days unfold? Because what we are finding is the Steve Bannon flood of shit. There is a flood of stuff coming out. It's kind of hard to keep track of all the different moving pieces. What are you looking for, man?
Well, like I said, even though everybody's like, "Oh, Greenland or Panama," I'm like, forget that. Just right. I mean, that is background noise. You deal with that when it becomes serious. This rollout, and I think it's really important for the American public to understand that there are reasons why we have and have had for a long, long time posse comitatus laws. There are reasons why the Insurrection Act, even though it's been around, as you showed, since the early 1800s, has not been invoked very often, because these are extraordinary measures that need to be taken in extraordinary times.
Yeah.
Are we really there? And the only thing that is going to calibrate that or restrain that power is going to be the American public. And so what I would say is watch, pay attention, get educated by watching shows like this, and really, I mean, go see war games, because I think we do a pretty good job kind of showing the struggle that a president should have before they ever invoke the Insurrection Act. And if in fact that happens, be prepared to really, really engage with your representatives, basically saying, what are you going to do to have a conversation with this president about this power that he now had, the autocratic kind of direction that we're headed in this country.
Yeah, and the power they give away too, it is significant. So there is time, and there's time to use our voice. And that's what we tell everybody. It's about using your voice and stepping up and being heard. So we haven't lost that power yet. Well, I don't want to keep you too long. Thank you so much. Any final thoughts? I'll let you go.
No, I mean, you know, I just want to give a plug for VoteVets and for Vet Voices. You know, incredibly, they're people who have served our country in the most dangerous places in the world. They're people who have worn the uniform. They are veterans, and they are still in the fight, pushing for the values that they believed led them to take that oath of office and join the military. This is a great organization. I hope all of you out there, I'm sure you're all supporting, but every little bit helps. And share their content with your neighbors, with your friends. Don't be afraid to have tough conversations with your neighbors about what this looks like. And more than anything, for those of you out there who are veterans, you will get listened to. You have a platform that is a couple steps higher than the average person who hasn't sacrificed much for this country. So good luck.
I appreciate that. You stole my closing. We're done. No, I'm kidding. Well, Heidi, thank you so much. It was a pleasure. So for those who understand, I was on the red team for War Games. So if you watch the documentary, you'll see
the red cell.
I played Steve Bannon, basically, or Mike Flynn, Steve Bannon. So I never got to hang out with these guys because I was in another room trying to make their lives very hard by sending some terrible social media posts and everything. So it's a pleasure working against you and with you now. And thank you so much for your time and always your support for Vet Voice Foundation. Of course, VoteVets. We just so much appreciate you, and keep up the fight, man.
Terrific. Hope it was helpful.
Very. See you soon. I always enjoy those conversations. So again, that's the thing. I think what we're seeing is, as you read these orders, you're seeing the things that are inside of them. You know, they've got they're 90 days to talk about the Insurrection Act. By that time, we'll have perhaps we'll have a Secretary of Defense, all these different ones. There's a lot that's in there that we have to keep an eye on, and we'll be keeping an eye on them for you right here at VoteVets, and of course our partners at Vet Voice as well, and of course our allies on the Hill and elsewhere. So how can you be involved? We always get to ask that. Everybody's off to do your thing. Thank you so much for joining us. I think this is a great time instead of Friday evening. We have a lot of you guys here. I see your comments. Thank you for joining us. Go to work, go to lunch. We appreciate your time. As always, the best way to get involved for us with VoteVets, there's two places. You go to our website, votevets.org. There's an important one I always had to mention first, the donate button. We'd love you to donate if you can. Even a little bit helps us. As you can see, we are investing in the fight. We are not taking a time off. We go much beyond just helping candidates run for office. We are helping pass good policy. We're fighting for our national security, the best of our national security assets. We're fighting for our military families who are facing things like, I don't know if you know this, but when they got rid of all the telework and said they have to go back to work, you'd be amazed how many military spouses have been given jobs to the government because of the power of telework. So we're going to see a spike in military spouse unemployment. Those are the kind of issues you'll see us taking on as this administration unfolds. So that's votevets.org, hit donate. Now, the second one, the one I get asked about the most, is the take action button. People ask all the time, how can I help you guys? That's it. It's really easy. You go to our website, there's a button that says take action right there. You click on it. We're going to show it right now. And that is the place where you can get signed up for our emails and find out what's going on, when we need your voice. We'll send out surveys, we'll send out polls, we'll even send out requests, maybe have you participate in a video for us if you're a veteran or otherwise. It's not just for veterans, okay? I can't emphasize it enough to you guys. Like every organization, there's 16 million living veterans in America. We will not do anything without the power of our partners and our allies, and that is all of you. If you don't even know somebody that served, we still need you to be a part of our mission. So that's votevets.org. Take action. In the meantime, please subscribe. I know you may be watching this on Twitter, you may be watching it on LinkedIn. I don't know where you're watching it, but we're really trying to grow our YouTube channel so we can have more of these conversations, reach more of our friends and partners. And that's key. Key to that is if you understand YouTube at all, you got to hit that subscribe button. You really want to be high speed, hit that chime button. There's like a bell, hit that button. That'll let you know when we post new videos or go live like this. You won't even have to find the notice. You'll get a notice that we're going live. We're going to be doing this a lot as we with breaking news or things that develop like this. So we appreciate you joining us. I'm going to let you go. I am Fred Wellman, a retired Army officer. I serve as the host of On the Line with the VoteVets. You're with us at votevets.org. We will see you again. We've got a lot of work to do, folks. Don't give up. Don't give up the fight.